This is a general lecture on the material. It raises the question, is there any reliable material evidence, archaeologically speaking, that you could apply to early followers of Jesus? You want to call them Christian. That, as some of you know, that's a little later down the pike, right? But early Jewish followers of Jesus, and we're talking mainly about Jerusalem, although I will throw in a couple of other locations such as Pompeii as we go through. So let's concentrate though on the funerary evidence. In Jerusalem, over 900 tombs have been uncovered in the last, I'm going to just say 100, 150 years. Probably the actual count would be around 2,000, but we think there might be as many as 3,000 of these ossuaries or bone boxes in those tombs. It's reflecting a burial practice that was predominant from the 1st century BC to about 70 CE with the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. The practice of cave tomb burials is what I'm talking about with these ossuaries inside. I'm talking to a bar audience, by the way, so won't need to belabor the details, right? You all have been reading about this since the James ossuary in the year 2000. But predominantly in Jerusalem. What this gives us is an amazing opportunity. If you leave aside theology, there's nothing really sensational or particularly surprising about uncovering the tomb of people related to Jesus, his family, or even Jesus himself. Simply because Jerusalem is a small city, and since the Six-Day War in particular, many of you have been there, right? What do you see all around the different directions of Jerusalem, particularly on the south, right? And to the east? Building, right? And so as bulldozers uncover, the necropolis of Jerusalem is being exposed, slowly but surely. And so this is just a fact. If you did this with any ancient city, you would come across the remains of people related to the city. Ossuaries, there are 590 inscriptions from this period that of 700, there are 704 inscriptions, 590 from tombs, mostly ossuaries. So one writer called our inscriptional evidence from this period the domain of the dead. In other words, most of what we're getting in terms of writing from the period, 590 out of 704 total inscriptions are in these tombs. So if you want to talk about inscriptional evidence for early Christianity, if there is any, you definitely want to look at the tombs. And that's what we're going to do. These bone boxes, we'll see lots of pictures. Most of you have in your mind a template of what an ossuary looks like. They can be ornamented, inscribed, or plain. The inscriptions are in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. The two main sources today are this catalog Rahmani and a more recent volume published in 210, edited by Hannah Cotton. Many of my colleagues still just use Rahmani. It puts them way behind because Rahmani only surveyed the Israel State collection of ossuaries and their inscriptions and decorative motifs up to 1989. Well, since 1989, so many other ossuaries and tombs have been uncovered that to get the entire corpus, you need to also include Hannah Cotton. So you're going to get today, might be the first time this has been presented publicly, I'm quite sure it probably is, a report on the complete corpus. Now, I can't do all 590 inscriptions, but I'm going to do those that I think might relate to followers of Jesus. If I say Christianity, you know what I mean, right? But Jewish followers of Jesus living in and around Jerusalem from the period of his life up to 70 AD. Did they leave anything behind that we can say, that's definitely a follower of Jesus, as opposed to evidence that all Jews would use? In other words, Christians didn't use special cups, plates, saucers, dipping bowls, or even ossuaries, as far as we know. But did they ever write on some of those materials or scratch on some of those materials something that would distinctly indicate that it was them. Now, the consensus is no. And it's such a ironclad consensus that for me to even raise this topic, even in a bar seminar, even with Herschel Shanks, who's quite open to controversial theories, is still marginal. As what I'm giving to you today is considered marginal by 99% of my colleagues, some of which know something about it, many of which don't. And that's not an insult, it's just a fact. I say all that just to say that on my topic today, this is the consensus. Ossuaries themselves completely lack Christian inscription and marks. Okay, so I could just quit. The ornamentation on Jewish ossuaries is non-symbolic. It's just decorations. You go to the ossuary shop, they've got them up on the wall, and you go, I'd like 22. I sort of like, honey, do you like 33 or do you like 30? I sort of like the 7 petals better than the 6. I like those little and okay, I'll take that. I'll put that together for me. And now, I think some of that went on, but also, you're going to see in the tomb we've just investigated, people had the ability to create their own individualized expressions. And sometimes they get a standard ossuary that was probably factory made, but it's got a space in it. And in that space, they personalize it. Sometimes with a name, but if it's ever more than a name, then it really gets exciting. No expressions of hope for everlasting life, bodily resurrection, or rest in an eternal home appear on ossuaries or in contemporaneous tombs. And that is the Honorable Rahmani, the editor of the major catalog, and I quote him because he's the most citable and the clearest on this, but everybody agrees. If you look at Hannah Cotton's volume, in example after example that I'm going to cover today, Jonathan Price, who wrote the material on the Christian ossuaries, or the material that could be considered Christian, he concludes in each case that it's not Christian, it's been over-interpreted by certain scholars, mainly Bugatti and so forth. To look at what we did, and I say we, Simca Jacobovici, because he was filming all this. You've got to document what you do. And this has never been filmed before. And what I did with him is we wanted to see everything. Now, you can't see all of the 2,000 ossuaries because some are not available, but in the Israeli State Collection alone, they're scattered. Some are at the Rockefeller, some at the Israel Museum, some at Bet Shemesh, some at Hebrew University. We had a huge list and wanted to see them all firsthand, to carefully examine them and photograph them and study them. And so here we are in the basement of the Rockefeller. First day we started, we spent days on this, filming and searching through hundreds of ossuaries, consulting experts, consulting the catalog. It was very, very exciting. So here's some of what we found. These two ossuaries, this is the front. This is one ossuary. I'm sorry. This one and this is the back of it. This isn't real clear, but I have a close-up coming. 1945 in Talpiot. This is not the so-called Talpiot Jesus tomb, but this is a tomb nearby. What is it? Less than a mile away, Simca? What would you say? You can walk to it. It's just down the road. 14 ossuaries. 3 were stolen. I mentioned that just to let you know. Ossuaries do get stolen. The tomb was discovered. 3 of them were carried off by workers, but 11 were recovered. There was a coin of Herod Agrippa, pottery, late Hellenistic, early Roman. But look at this. This has not been noted by people. I never see by people that write about this tomb. The names, 3 names: Simon bar Saba, Miriam of Simon, probably wife, and a Matthew. Bar Saba is only known in all of our corpus in the New Testament in the book of Acts, right? That family name. Now, does that mean this is him? Not necessarily, but it's worth noting. It's a rare name, and the only way we know that name is associated with followers of Jesus. So it'd at least make you curious. Was there anything else in that tomb? Since there's a family name that we only know in the New Testament in the book of Acts, doesn't mean it's him, but is there anything else? Well, in fact, there is. On the side of one of the ossuaries in is written in what would be in English, possibly translated by Sucanic as Jesus woe, like a wail, a cry. Could have several interpretations. Here's a close-up. There's E-A-sus and then U. Now, that seems to be a kind of possibility of a cry to Jesus, no matter how you interpret it. The consensus is that these two letters, iota, omicron, right there, and there is a stroke right here that sort of faded off. This, by the way, is written in charcoal. So, we're lucky to get these photographs. It's fading more and more and more. That it can't say Jesus woe, because, what would that mean? So it must be Iuda. So it's Jesus, son of a guy named Judah. It's nothing. Okay, that's, I guess, a possibility, except you don't have the last two letters. And so it's sort of an odd way to think of abbreviating Judah today as Jew, J-U. Jesus, son of Jew. There's no known use of that. But also, there is another ossuary. Now, why didn't I show you a picture of it? Because they couldn't find it. It's on the lid. It's in the Rockefeller somewhere, but they couldn't locate it. Also written in charcoal, and it says, Jesus alot. I put question mark because we don't know what alot. Is it from Allah, to rise up? Or is it from Elah, woe, maybe? An Aramaic form of woe. We can talk about all that, but I just want you to get a survey. But these are possible cries to Jesus on two ossuaries, or cries about Jesus. In other words, are these people named Jesus in the ossuaries? Possibly. Or could they be people who are crying to Jesus as they bury their dead? And that was what Bagatti suggested. On the PowerPoint, I think it eliminated some of the slides that wouldn't process right in the from the keynote to the PowerPoint, but only one. It is an ossuary just like this, and it has a charcoal cross on four sides. Four sides. And it's usually interpreted, it's just literally a cross mark like this on all four sides. It's usually interpreted as just random marks. Maybe somebody was getting ready to make a decoration on all four sides and they put a cross. But it can't be a cross because the conclusion of most scholars of early Christianity is the cross didn't exist. So let's go ahead. On the Mount of Olives at Dominus Flevit, there's a huge cemetery, necropolis of the dead. It seems to have any number of things. One possibility is Shimon bar Yonah, Simon bar Jonah, that might relate to early Christians because we do know a Simon bar Jonah in the New Testament. And there's a lot more in this cemetery on the Mount of Olives. Oh, there's the cross. Okay, I was wrong. Yay, nothing got eliminated. Okay, see right there? And there's the other side, and there's four. So whatever you want to call it, it's not an X, it's a T mark on all four sides. And that was in the Sucanic tomb. Okay. Now, we can't do all of them, but here's an example. And most of these are at Dominus Flevit. Of all, here's the X mark there you just saw. This is a monogram that's in the Dominus Flevit cemetery. These are all sorts of others. This one is Judah, and right under it, a mark just like that. Well, pretty clearly that seems to be associated with the name. We've got another Jesus right here. This is Jesus, and notice there's an X in front of it. That's also true on the Talpiot tomb ossuary that we're going to get to, the Jesus tomb. It has Jesus written in Aramaic, and it has this identical X right in front of it. This generally is seen to be such a clear, no one would say that's not a Christian cross, it's a Byzantine cross. And so the conclusion of Gibson is, my colleague Shimon Gibson, that is a Christian cross on an ossuary, but it was put in later by maybe some tomb robbers. And I suppose that's possible, but it depends on your presuppositions. Here's our Jesus woe, and so forth. Now, if you go further afield, this is at Pompeii. Behind a plaque was found this mark of a cross with a kind of a little table under it, and that's usually dismissed as a bracket. It was holding maybe a shelf or something. But something was over this hiding it, whatever it was. And so normally you wouldn't hide a bracket, right? I mean, a bracket would hold a shelf. But you see how this wall is faded here. This is no longer visible. But to the charge that the cross is not used in the first century, we do have a text, the Epistle of Barnabas, dated usually around 100 A.D. He talks about the symbolism of a passage in Genesis where Abraham circumcised 10 and 8 and 300 men. I'm talking like Abraham Lincoln. And he's getting symbolism out of that. Early Christian writers did this all the time. Oh, why would there be so many fish, that Jesus caught? And why would there be... But what he says about that, I'm not as interested in. He says it's symbolic. If you write the number 318 out in Greek letters, it represents Jesus. You get Jesus Christ, and then you get the T. The T. He says, look, and because the cross, which is shaped like the T, was destined to convey grace, it also mentions the 300. So you have an early Christian right at the turn of the first century saying the cross, which is shaped like a T. So there's a literary text that would show us that Christians were thinking about maybe the T shape or the tau shape as standing for the cross. The consensus would be that there are no Christian crosses until the late 3rd, early 4th century. So anything like that found earlier is not a cross. What I'm suggesting here is that we revisit that question and look at all of them. Now, here's something interesting. This is Figueras, and we met with him all day at Bet Shemesh, where they have all the ossuaries, and we showed him, we had actually filmed this fragment at the Israel Museum in the basement where they have it. Everything's scattered about. But he had published it, and he was very excited when he found it. It's a fragment of an ossuary, and it's the word Yeshua, see, Yod, Shin, right there, and see the Yeshua inside a circle, maybe, a circle, or maybe a fish. He suggested a fish. Now, why would anyone write Jesus inside a fish? Some of you could take a guess right away. There's a passage in the New Testament about Jesus being in the belly of the earth, like Jonah in the belly of a fish. Is it a fish? Is it a circle? Rachmani says that this is Figueras' interpretation. He calls it a over-interpretation. I think he says it's fanciful and so forth, that it's not a fish, it's just a circle. And then he mentions Price, who does the Cotton volume, also said, I think he's the one who said it's over-interpretation, meaning, it's a circle. But he gives two other examples of circles, which I'll discuss in a minute. But because you've got this little cross mark here, very clearly made, and maybe the mouth here, I'm not going to dismiss Figueras' interpretation, especially in the light of what we recently found at Talpiot. Now, we don't know where this one came from. Probably Dominus Flavit. But Figueras, early on, I think he's backed off a little. He got a lot of opposition. But early on, he said, I would argue that this is the earliest evidence of early Christianity. Christians remembering Jesus and the fish, and the symbol of the fish is the symbol of eternal life for Jonah, as this would be a possible Jonah image. We also started looking around, and all of a sudden we're seeing little fish all over the place. This is an ossuary. I admit it's crudely drawn, but if you study them closely, it's hard to scratch in limestone with just a blunt nail. And this particular one is not just a random ossuary. On the lid, it says Mariamne. It says Mariamne, which is the special name for Maria that's used in the Talpiot tomb. So you have a lid that says Mariamne, and then you have 3 little fish written across the ossuary, if they are fish. Most of my colleagues would say, Tabor, you're dreaming, you're delusional, those are just random scratches. But they're sort of defacing, wouldn't you say? What would you say about this? It doesn't say Jesus. This could be letters, or it could be features of the fish, if it is a fish. But this is on one of the ossuaries that we examined at Bet Shemesh. And we were open to the idea that it might be a fish. Now, I've got 3 slides here. This is pretty dense. So obviously I'm not going to go over these. I'm going to make a point, though. These are the 21 references to Jesus in all languages, Yeshua or Jesus, in other words, Greek, English, Greek, Aramaic, or Hebrew. I don't think there are any Latin. All the locations, 21 of them, including the Talpiot Jesus tomb that has 2, including the Jesus fish that you just saw, Jesus in a fish, let's call it, that would be 1. So if you start talking about, and then we just saw the Jesus woe and the Jesus alot, so that would be take away 5 that might even refer to Jesus. We began to discuss among ourselves, you know those late night light bulbs that go on? Rather than being common, some of my colleagues on television, I remember after our film showed, said, oh, the name Jesus, that's so common. Well, it's 4, we know exactly how common. What is it, 4.4% basically. So, you know, it's the difference between James and Jimmy. My actual birth name, I can pull out my passport, is Jimmy. 1946, now you know how old I am. Guess what? Was not common. James was the most common male name. Jimmy was one of the rarest male names. Say, well, Jimmy is James. No, it isn't. I've borne that burden all my life. Jimmy is not James. So my dad liked the name Jimmy. Maybe Jimmy Stewart, I don't know, but you know, it was popular in the war. So if you take all the names, nicknames, all the forms of the names, 21, and you start looking at them, half of these clearly cannot be Jesus of Nazareth, okay? Like this one, Jesus, father of Simondi. This one is Jesus, son of Dithicius. But here's just Yehoshua. And as you go on down, you find that here's Yeshua. That's the one that has the cross with it on the side of it. As you go on down and look at the others of the 21, here's the Jesus alot. And here's Jesus woe. If it is, instead of Judas, Jesus woe. So what am I saying? I'm saying that it's possible that followers of Jesus, especially around Talpiot and the Mount of Olives, are putting Jesus on their ossuaries, not because the guy inside is named Jesus, but because they're thinking of Jesus. So this would be a vocative use of the word Jesus. If we just had the name, I think it would be less likely. But if Jesus alot and Jesus iu, Jesus woe and Jesus rise up, stand, then we would have a couple of examples there in the Barsabbas tomb. Up until the Talpiot Jesus tomb and the tomb 200 feet away that I reported on last time, that's a rough survey of what we had. We had names of Jesus, we had possible crosses, we had maybe a Jesus, Christ to Jesus, and some of the other things we've seen, and maybe the fish image. I'm thinking now, because of what's been found in the Talpiot tomb, we need to revisit all the other evidence, because this to me is very, very clear. Most of you know there are 2 tombs. Here's the map. This is the old city. I realize that's not real dark. If you go south of the old city, you get just across the valley here. It's very close. You get the 2 Talpiot tombs side by side. The one that has the 6 names, including Jesus, son of Joseph, Mariamne, Yosef, Mattai, and so forth, is under this paving stone in this courtyard between 2 condominium buildings with this ceiling slab. And we describe all of that in the book. But 200 feet away is this other tomb that's under a building. It's right there. And here's a map of it. Here's what the tomb looks like from its early exploration in 1981. We call it the patio tomb to distinguish it from the one that's in the garden there. Okay. Only one ossuary was taken out in 1981 hastily, and here is Simca and Felix, his associate, examining it. Looks like it might even be a child's ossuary. No inscription on it, but some nice decorations. And so there's still 7 left inside. We got a license to actually excavate this tomb, but how do you excavate a tomb under a building? I don't think the occupants would probably agree to digging tunnels and bringing in heavy equipment. And so we did it with robotic camera probes. Here's the building, and here's the outline of where we thought was the tomb. We went in with drills. You can see the dimensions here, 2.35 meters. And we were able to get to a bottom floor and drop on down into the tomb. Here's our team. Rami Arav, who's the archaeologist of the team. I'm the historian. Our other assistants, we had the Israeli antiquities. We even had, at first, hostile and then friendly religious. They're at first hostile because we had not fully conveyed to them that we had permission from their leader to do this. Thanks to Simca's long negotiations for over a year with this gentleman who reserves the right to tell you whether you can ever investigate a tomb. Here's our little space age setup. We got the drilling. We've got Walter Klassen, who's our techie genius who created this robotic camera and all of this kind of equipment. It's high-tech, low-tech. It's low-tech because you might have to fix it, which we did, and he literally is working at night with ropes and pulleys and air hoses that maneuver it, but it's high-tech because we have to have our little control center here, our little Cape Canaveral, right, where we can mission control, we called it. Here's our team, wonderful team, General Electric, Nat Geo was involved early on, then Discovery actually ended up finishing the project, and all sorts of technicians, and there's Rami, and there's me, and there's Simca somewhere there, and our other people. This is us coming on in, and I'm telling you, as I described to you a year ago, the feeling, the quietness. We could hear the whirl of the pulleys, and the camera goes in, and all of a sudden you get the image, and I think we did yell out after we hushed for a moment, but there's that moment of hush where you feel like we're going in a place that it was briefly looked at in 1981, but now we're examining it. And right away, look, that was our first view. Isn't that amazing? You see, ossuary in one of the niches, there it is. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to go around all of the ossuaries. Here they are, and we're going to film around them. Here's our 2 probe holes right here with the camera reaching all the way around here, and see what we can find. We did find a couple of clear inscriptions. We knew there were 3. We'd been told there were 3 from that quick probe in 81, and then the excavators had to leave because of protests of the religious. They sealed up the tomb, and now we're back. This was in 210. The word Mara, the name Mara written. And this raises a whole controversy because there's also a Mara in the tomb 200 feet away, the Jesus tomb. And we have suggested, with great opposition actually, the consensus of most is this is just a nickname for Martha, but that Mara actually, Mar, Lord or Master, Mara, the feminine, that it could be the word Lourdes, honoring Our Lady or something like that, because it's also in the Talpiot tomb. There's an inscription here that we could not read. It's right there, but we couldn't get to this ossuary because it was turned around backwards. When they briefly examined them and put them back, but in the old photographs from 81, look, that's clearly a name there. It looks like Ionas or Ulia, maybe John or Jonah or Julia. So this would be one of the things, if we can go back in the tomb, we would like to certainly read that very clearly, and we'd be able to read it clearly and get another name. And here's what I couldn't show you last time. On this particular ossuary, on the front of it is this. Written between the decorations in a kind of a archway, decorated archway, is a 4-line Greek inscription. Here's several shots of it. Now it's not names. It's saying something. It's usually called an epitaph. And epitaphs are very rare. There are 6 or 7 that have ever been found on ossuaries, and invariably they say the same thing. Don't move these bones. Cursed is he who moves these bones, something like that. We immediately sight-read that. This is basically me inking it in. We read it as Dios iao upso agba. And Dios is the wondrous one, like Zeus, but it's an adjective. Dios, the wondrous one. This would be a Greek form of the divine name, Yod-He, Vav-He, but written in Greek. Upso is to lift up in Greek. Some of you know Greek. That's the main verb for lifting up. Agba we couldn't figure out, so I'm going to leave that for a minute. This is just some stuff about Dios. It's a genitive of dis. And iao we found on other inscriptions. Here's an example of this particular spelling, how Greeks would write God's name in Greek. And upso, this is really interesting because you look up upso, the verb, in the dictionaries, and you begin to get two references in the New Testament using upso and referring to Jesus. When I am lifted up of the earth, I will draw all people to myself. And Acts 5 particularly, God lifted up this one at his right hand as leader and Savior. So it's not that you couldn't use upso to lift up a chair or a book. I can upso a book, I can lift up. But in the context of a funeral, of a funerary, in a funerary context, in the context of an ossuary inscription, whenever you see something about lifting up, you wonder if it is either lifting up God or praising God or maybe lifting up the person in terms of resurrection. And it depends on how it's translated. Our final translation of this right now, and we're open to suggestions. I'm giving a formal paper on this tomorrow at the SBL, in which I'll present for the first time to the Academy our final interpretation in terms of where we are now, is that it would be translated something like the wondrous, O wondrous God, or the wondrous God, lift up, and then this nobody can figure out, Agba, but if any of you are Jewish, what is Agba? The Hagbah, what is Hagbah? Do you know anything about lifting up the Torah? What's that called? Anybody Jewish here besides Simcha? The lifting up of the Torah? That it is very possibly bilingual. That is, you have Greek, Dios, and then Hebrew written in Greek, and then Greek, and then Hebrew written in Greek. So it would be, O wondrous Jehovah, lift up, or something like that. Or it could be, he has lifted up, or he will lift up, or please lift up. But something about lifting up, exalting, and calling upon God. If we only had that, I think we would be left there, but fortunately there was more. On the side of the ossuary next to it, there's this very strange thing that looks like a kind of a doorway, and then maybe a window, but windows didn't really have cross panes like this, so is that a cross? But it definitely beckons something about entrance, going through. So we were beginning to see this ossuary as we put it together as something to do with resurrection. Also little fish. We think these are fish. Other people, it's not fish, it's just a little circle. But we don't have these sort of decorations anywhere else, and there are 5 of them across the top. And then this. I'm going to interpret this as a big fish. You see the little flipper here, and the flipper here. Here's the body. There's a stick figure here. You go on back, and you've got something that looks like a big tail. When we saw this, maybe some of you saw it on the film, we identified it as a big fish spitting out a human figure, a Jonah image. And so that was our tentative identification. We considered other possibilities. The dominant, I think, counter-interpretation now is that is a vase. It's a vase. If it's a vase, it's got a pretty big, funny little bottom on it. See that bottom part there? Can you see that? And then you've got this little stick figure here, and you've got these little flippers. We're sticking with the Jonah, the fish idea, trying to pair it up with other things, and pair it with the inscription, as I'll show you in a minute. Why we would pair it with the inscription. Now, Charlesworth, though, you know Charlesworth. He's here this week, right? I think he gave a lecture. He started looking at our little stick figure here, and I'll give this in my paper tomorrow, but just for this lecture, this right here, Y-O-N-H, look, see, Y-O-N-H, Jonah, written in Hebrew. Now, some of my colleagues who are not epigraphers, say, oh, it didn't say Jonah, it's just scratches, have said, you know, you don't make a yod like that, and you don't make a vav like that, and you don't make a nun like that, and a hey like that. Have you ever looked at ossuary inscriptions? You just looked at a few. They're very graffiti-like, right? But I think you could show this to an Israeli kid, and average Israeli kid would say, Jonah? Why is Jonah written on that thing? And also the average Israeli kid would say it's a fish. Here's a better picture. Okay, Y-O, look at the noon there, and the hey. There's the hey. It's written like this, you know, the curve. It's very clear. Yo-na. And then whatever this is, I suggested to Sumka, I think this was my idea, that maybe this is, they're going by the text, seaweed around the head. Seaweed around the head. Because, so we went to the Jonah passage, the waters closed over me to take my life, the deep surrounded me, weeds were wrapped around my head, at the roots of the mountains I went down to the land, whose bars close over me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Yahweh my God. Now, to me, that interprets the other, and the other interprets this, meaning the inscription. If it was just found anywhere, I guess maybe the inscription might say something else, like calling on God to exalt. You could say, "O Lord God, I exalt you," or something like that. But with next to what I understand to be the Jonah image, I think the two go together, and that'll be my argument, my formal argument tomorrow in the paper. Not to mention the word Jonah written across the fish. So the point is, if we have this 200 feet away from a Jesus tomb with some Jesus, son of Joseph, with these other names associated with the Jesus family, do we have not only evidence of early followers of Jesus, but maybe even the very people who buried Jesus in his family and cared for him and are celebrating his resurrection? So, what about Jonah? This is a table from Snyder, Graydon Snyder, in which he goes to the catacombs at Rome and lists all of the motifs that early Christians used in their artwork. And you can just go down the line. Giving life to Eve, Adam and Eve, Noah and the ark. And here's the totals. So Noah and the ark, because that's salvation, right? You're in the ark, you're saved by water. You can find 8 Noahs in all the catacomb art. Now this would be 4th century, really. Late 3rd, early 4th century. Look at this. Just go on down. Jonah cast into the sea, 38. Jonah and the fish, the ketos, 28. Jonah at rest, which is paradise. You know, he gets out of death, 42. Look at that. By far, there's no other image. If you put these 3 together, it's over 100. 100 images of Jonah in the catacombs. So how are Christians representing resurrection of the dead in the 4th century? Look at this. Sea monsters spitting out Jonah, Jonah being spit out, Jonah being spit out. They're just 3 examples. So here's the problem. 1st century followers of Jesus, 4th century Christians in Rome. Quite a gap, right? But if there is a saying in the Gospels about the sign of Jonah, we're already in the 1st century. As if we first got Jonah traditions in the 4th century, and let's say Augustine or some other 4th century writer said, you know, Jesus is sort of like Jonah. And everybody said, that's a great idea. I'm going to start doing Jonah images to represent the resurrection of Jesus. Then you would have an argument that, well, there's no literary evidence that it's in the 1st century, but we have literary evidence that it's in the 1st century. And it's in our Q source, right? The earliest gospel source. I realize this is very small for you to read, but you can maybe see the underlining. We have 2 versions, Luke and Matthew. And remember, Matthew often expands and interprets Q. Q is that earliest collection of the sayings of Jesus embedded in Matthew and Luke. And he often expands Q, meaning he explains it. I tell my students, for the dumb reader. He'll say, there will be no sign given but the sign of Jonah. And all of you who are in would go, sign of Jonah, I got that. I'm one of the Gnostics. So I'm one of the... You go, someone raised their hand in the back. What's the sign of Jonah? Read Matthew. Matthew helps you. For, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, or the whale, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So here we have a first century tradition, first century, in Syria, Palestine, in which Christians are talking about the sign of Jonah and interpreting the sign of Jonah not just as a symbol of repentance, but as a symbol of Jesus' resurrection. So I think we've got it back to the period of the life of Jesus, and if it's beginning with the Q source, we usually date that as early as even 50. So that's what we found. We found the inscription, we found the Jonah image, we found those other names and peculiarities next to the Jesus tomb, and what we now want to do is go back and reinterpret everything. This Jonah image makes me more convinced that the Figueras circle, so-called, with Jesus written in it, is probably also a Jonah image, and that fish with the 2 letters that we're not sure what they are, I think it might be iota, eta, which would be the first 2 letters of Jesus, that could be a Jonah image. And we're looking at other scratchings and markings and so forth in terms of early Christians that might have left evidence of their faith behind. If they're going to leave evidence of their faith behind in a tomb, I think it would most likely have to do with something about resurrection, hope, the cross, salvation. In Jesus we have hope as we bury our dead. So that's what we would expect, in tombs. As far as other archaeological evidence on cups and saucers and bowls and that sort of thing, or plaques, I'm not so sure that does exist, but in tombs I think we could make an argument that we've got some evidence to reconsider, that early followers of Jesus are in fact expressing some kind of resurrection hope, and in this case using the sign of Jonah.